Hi guys, my name is Matti Sulanto and I'm a photographer. And in this video we're gonna talk about tiny lenses. And tiny means micro four thirds, of course. And let's face it, one of the best reasons to use micro four thirds gear is the compactness and tiny size. Tiny lenses, tiny cameras. And in this video I'm gonna share some of my favorite tiny lenses for micro four thirds. But if your favorite lens is not mentioned in this video, please do share it in the comments down below, because we all want to hear what is your favorite tiny lens for micro four thirds. But without any further ado, let's get started. This lens deserves a mention every time we talk about tiny lenses, and it is of course the Lumix 12 to 32mm f3.5 5.6 plastic kit lens. It came as a kit with almost every Lumix camera body, or you could order that kit. There are many other kit lenses, of course, too. And it's a super tiny lens. It's a little bit plasticky. My version, the one that I have, it also has a plastic mount, but apparently there is a metal mount version too, and that probably is slightly better. But I've never had any problems with the plastic mount either, and I don't think the plastic mount is any reason to walk away from this lens, because this lens is super sharp. It has a stabilizer, and like I said, it's very tiny, probably the tiniest zoom lens for micro four thirds, at least with autofocus. And you can get some amazing pictures with this lens. The reach at the telephoto end is a bit limited. It can feel a little bit short, but at the wide end, it starts already at 12mm, which is 2mm wider than the usual kit lenses for micro four thirds. And those 2mm can prove very useful in interiors or other situations where you need the widest possible angle of view. And then another zoom lens, which almost never gets a mention anywhere. It is this 14 to 42mm f3.5 5.6 Lumix motorized kit zoom lens. And I fully understand the motorized zoom and motorized manual focus is not for everyone, but this has a couple of upsides compared to other collapsible zoom lenses. When your camera is powered off, this lens is really tiny, but whenever you power your camera on, the lens automatically extends to its shooting position. And when you turn your camera off, the lens automatically retracts. If you have a manual collapsible lens, you always have to manually extend and retract the lens. And sometimes it can cost you a shot. You have your camera on, but the zoom is at its retracted position. And you can't take a picture of that decisive moment right in front of you. But with this lens, you are always ready to take the next picture if you have your camera powered on. So sometimes these motorized functions can actually save you the day if you can capture that decisive moment. So if you can find one of these lenses, grab it. And then we have one more kit lens. It is this Lumix 12 to 60mm f3.5 5.6 kit lens. This also came as a kit with many Lumix camera bodies. At first glance, this is not necessarily a tiny lens, but when you consider the range, this covers in full frame terms from 24 to 120mm in this size. So I think this qualifies as a tiny lens when you consider the range. And the build quality is really good. The exterior is mostly plastic, but this feels really good. And this is also very sharp, optically great. One of my favorite kit lenses ever. And the range is very useful. You get that proper telephoto effect at 60mm. All in all, a very nice lens. And for the reach, it is tiny. Then we have some prime lenses. The first one is the 14mm f2.5 Lumix lens, and this is the most compact, most lightweight autofocus lens in the whole micro four thirds lens lineup. Every lineup combined, Olympus, Panasonic and every other lineup combined. This is the tiniest autofocus lens. The 14mm focal length equals to about 28mm full frame angle of view, which is great for street photography, for landscape photography and any photography. I don't like to categorize lenses too much. This is great for any situation that demands a moderate wide-angle lens. The maximum aperture is f2.5, which is pretty good, especially if you consider the tiny size. It's not super great for low light photography, but then again, almost every Micro Four Thirds camera has an in-body stabilizer, so you should be good to go even in low light situations, unless you need to stop some fast action. For whatever reason, the public opinion seems to be that this is not one of the sharpest Micro Four Thirds lenses. Well, it's probably not one of the sharpest, but at least my pictures always turn out really sharp and good looking. I have nothing to complain about this lens regarding the optical quality. And then of course we have the Lumix 20mm f1.7, another almost like a classic already. 40mm equivalent angle of view, fast f1.7 maximum aperture, and it's sharp too. The slow autofocus is always mentioned with this lens, and to be honest, it is kind of slow, but I have to say that it's never been a major problem in my photography. I've always had plenty of time to focus my pictures and get some great shots with this lens. But I would not recommend this for video if you need autofocus, because the autofocus really doesn't work in video pretty much at all. The next one is the Panasonic Leica 25mm f1.4. You might say that it's not so tiny, but when you consider the maximum f1.4 aperture, I think this qualifies as a tiny lens. And for example, if you compare this and the Olympus 25mm f1.2, this is like half the size, and the difference between f1.4 and f1.2 is only like 2/3 of a stop. It's not even a full stop. And this Mark II version that I have, this is even weather sealed. And this renders beautifully. It has that little bit of that vintage feel to it when you shoot at wider apertures, but when you stop down a little bit, it's very, very sharp indeed. A beautiful lens, and you'll certainly get beautiful pictures also with this lens if 25mm is the right angle of view for you. And then I'd like to mention some lenses that I have used or owned in the past, but I don't have those lenses anymore. The first one is the Laowa 7.5mm f2 super wide angle lens. It has beautiful metal construction and manual focus, but with the super wide angle, manual focus is fine, and it's no reason not to want that lens. And the latest auto aperture version has full electronic communication with the camera body, which is really nice. You'll get full EXIF info on your files, and you can control the aperture from the camera, and all the exposure modes work. So it's a very nice lens and worth considering if you are looking for a super wide angle for your Micro Four Thirds system. And of course the Olympus 17mm f1.8 deserves a mention here. I used to own that lens in the past, but sadly I don't have that lens anymore. Sometimes that tiny Olympus lens is considered as a mediocre optical performer. But I have to disagree with that, because I can't see that mediocre performance in my pictures. My pictures look sharp and contrasty, and they look simply good. And it has a beautiful metal construction. It even has the manual focus clutch. And I think it's a great lens if you're looking for roughly 35mm equivalent lens for your Micro Four Thirds camera. And another good one is the Lumix 42.5mm f1.7, which often gets ignored in favor of the Olympus 45mm f1.8. But the Lumix lens is a better lens, it's sharper, and it focuses very, very close. It's almost like a semi-macro lens. And it's not any bigger than the Olympus lens, it's not any heavier, but it's a better lens. So I think it's definitely worth considering if you are looking for a short telephoto lens for your Micro Four Thirds camera body. And one more zoom lens, it's the Lumix 35 to 100mm f4 to f5.6 super tiny pocket-sized telephoto zoom lens. It's actually so tiny that when you first see the lens, you almost can't believe that it's a telephoto zoom lens. It's a great lens for any situation where you need a tiny telephoto zoom lens, like if you're traveling or whatever. The maximum aperture, of course, is not that bright, but that's one of the reasons why the lens is so tiny. But with a stabilizer, you are good to go in some low light situations too, as long as you don't have to stop any fast action. These are some of my favorite tiny lenses for Micro Four Thirds, and please do leave your favorite tiny lenses in the comments down below. And I also created a tiny lens playlist. Please take a look if you are interested. And if you found this video useful or entertaining, please do consider buying me a cup of coffee. There's a link down below for that if you don't live in Finland. Thanks so much for joining in once again, and I'll see you in the next one.